Commander Zixtara sat in the cold metal chair and felt her forearms shake against her will. The medical facility on her homeworld smelled of chemicals and fear, but she could not escape the worst smell that lived in her memory. The smell of burning human ships and the screams of her own soldiers echoing through space. War analyst Kellenoth sat across from her with his recording device ready and his large black eyes focused on her scarred face. Analyst had heard rumors about what happened at New Dakota, but he needed the full truth from someone who survived. Zixtara was one of only 47 soldiers who returned from a fleet that started with over 30,000 troops. The numbers alone told a story, but the analyst needed to understand how an advanced civilization like theirs could lose so badly to primitive human. Zixtara began her story with the confidence they all felt before the attack. The humans had been discovered only 5 cycles ago when their crude ships stumbled into Confederation space. Their technology was basic, and their weapons were simple chemical explosives and metal projectiles. The species had barely learned to travel between stars, and their colonies were scattered across dozens of worlds without proper coordination. The War Council had classified humans as Category 3, which meant minimal threat to Confederation interests. Their ships were slow, and their armor was thin. Intelligence reports showed they had no energy shields and no plasma weapons. Most of their colonies were farming worlds with populations under 1 million. They seemed like easy targets for resource extraction. Admiral Vortek had volunteered to lead the invasion of New Dakota because it looked like the simplest possible campaign. The planet had rich soil and valuable minerals, but only about 800,000 human settlers. Orbital scans showed basic defensive installations and a small militia force with outdated equipment. The admiral expected to complete the operation in 2 days and return home as a hero. The invasion fleet consisted of 200 warships, including 3 dreadnoughts and 12 battlecruisers. Supporting vessels carried 40,000 ground troops with advanced plasma weapons and powered armor. The humans had nothing that could threaten such a force, or so everyone believed. The fleet arrived at New Dakota. The planet looked exactly as intelligence had predicted. Agricultural zones stretched across 3 continents with small cities connected by simple transport networks. The orbital defense platforms were primitive chemical rockets and basic lasers that could barely scratch Confederation armor. Everything seemed perfect for a quick victory. Admiral Vortek opened communications, expecting immediate surrender. Human colonies had surrendered before when faced with overwhelming force. The standard protocol was simple. The humans would see the massive fleet and realize resistance was hopeless. They would negotiate terms for evacuation or integration into Confederation territories, but the response from New Dakota was different from the start. Instead of panicked transmissions or desperate pleas for mercy, the communication channels went completely silent. The humans stopped all broadcasts, and their defense platforms powered down. For 3 hours, the planet seemed to be preparing for surrender. Then a single transmission came from the planet's surface. The voice belonged to someone who identified himself as Command Jake Martinez of the New Dakota Defense Force. His words were calm and clear, without any sign of fear or desperation. He said simply that the Confederation had picked the wrong planet and should leave. Immediately, Admiral Vortek laughed at the message and ordered the fleet to begin orbital bombardment. The plan was to destroy the major cities first, and then eliminate the defense platforms. After showing the humans their helplessness, the ground forces would land and secure the remaining population for labor assignments. The first bombardment wave targeted the planetary capital. Plasma cannons from 6 battlecruisers fired simultaneously. At the city center, the beams should have vaporized everything in a 50-kilometer radius. Instead, the energy blasts struck some kind of shield system that had not appeared on any scanner. The entire city remained untouched confusion spread through the fleet as more hidden defenses revealed themselves. Massive railgun installations emerged from underground bunkers and began firing on the Confederation ships. The projectiles were simple metal slugs, but they moved at incredible speeds and struck with devastating force. 3 destroyers lost their main engines in the first. What shocked Zixthara most was how the humans had hidden their true capabilities. The agricultural equipment that seemed so primitive was actually camouflage for advanced weapons. Systems, grain processing facilities opened to reveal missile launchers. Farm irrigation systems were actually supply lines for underground military bases. The humans had turned their entire planet into a fortress while making it look like a peaceful colony, but the real terror began when individual human ships started attacking. These were not military vessels, but converted civilian craft with improvised weapons and armor. Mining ships, construction barges, and even passenger transports began ramming attacks against Confederation warships. The humans were deliberately crashing their own ships into the enemy fleet. Captain Lisa Rodriguez piloted a damaged cargo freighter directly into the dreadnought, Eternal Glory. Her ship was tiny compared to the massive warship, but she aimed for the reactor core and detonated her fusion drive on impact. The explosion tore through the dreadnought's armor and caused a chain reaction that destroyed the entire ship, along with its crew of 8,000. Zixthar watched in horror as more human ships followed the same pattern. They were not trying to win through superior firepower or tactics. They were winning by refusing to value their own lives above victory. Captain Ben Thompson rammed his mining vessel into a battlecruiser's bridge, killing himself and the entire enemy command crew. Engineer Amy Foster overloaded her cargo hauler's fusion drive to take out an entire squadron of fighters. Worst part was how organized these suicide attacks seemed to be. The humans were not acting from panic or desperation. Each ramming attack was precisely coordinated to maximize damage to the Confederation fleet. They had studied the weak points in every ship design and targeted exactly the right locations to cause maximum destruction. Admiral Vortek tried to adapt by spreading the fleet formation and increasing defensive fire, but the humans adapted faster. They began using their civilian ships as decoys, while hidden weapon platforms fired from the planet's surface. Every time the Confederation forces thought they understood the human strategy, something new would emerge from underground or from behind the planet's moons. The battle continued for 18 hours, and the Confederation lost 60% of its fleet. 3 dreadnoughts were destroyed, along with most of the battlecruisers and support vessels. Thousands of experienced soldiers and officers were dead. The humans had achieved something impossible by defeating a technologically superior force through pure determination and tactical innovation. When Admiral Vortek finally ordered a retreat to regroup, the remaining ships barely had enough crew to operate properly. The proud invasion fleet that had arrived with such confidence was now a collection of damaged vessels, trying to escape from primitive humans who refused to fight according to conventional military doctrine. As Ichura finished this part of her story and looked at the analyst, who seemed unable to process what he had heard, she could see in his eyes the same disbelief that had paralyzed the Confederation command during the battle. The idea that a primitive species could defeat advanced technology through sheer willpower was almost impossible to accept, but this was only the beginning of her story. The orbital battle had been devastating, but the ground campaign that followed would prove even worse. The humans had shown they could fight in space, but Zixthara had yet to learn what they could do when defending their own soil with their families. Behind them, the analyst prepared his recording device for the next session, and Zixthara closed her eyes to gather strength for the memories that still haunted her dreams. War analyst Kelenov activated his recording device again as Commander Zixthara prepared to continue her testimony. Her wounds had healed during the past months, but the memories still caused her visible pain. She flexed her forearms and began describing the second phase of the disaster at New Dakota. After the initial shock of losing 60% of the fleet, Admiral Vortok had tried to salvage the mission by focusing on specific targets. The remaining Confederation ships pulled back to a safer distance and began systematic bombardment of what appeared to be key human installations. The strategy was to force the humans into open space combat where superior technology would provide an advantage, but the humans refused to cooperate with conventional tactics. Instead of launching their remaining ships for a final space battle, they began using their vessels in ways no military doctrine had ever anticipated. Small human craft would approach the Confederation fleet while broadcasting surrender signals. When the ships got close enough to board, they would detonate their entire fuel supply, taking out nearby enemy vessels. Lieutenant Commander Vexhai had been monitoring communications when a human mining ship requested permission to dock with his cruiser. The ship's captain claimed to have important intelligence about hidden human weapon sites. Standard protocol required accepting such intelligence offers, but Vexhai had grown suspicious of human tactics. He ordered the mining ship to maintain distance, while a boarding party prepared to investigate. The human captain identified himself as Carl Peterson and claimed his crew wanted to defect rather than die fighting for a lost cause. His story seemed believable because many colonial populations had switched sides when faced with overwhelming force. Peterson provided detailed information about underground bunkers and hidden supply depots that matched Confederation intelligence reports. But when the boarding party approached Peterson's ship, they discovered the entire vessel was filled with high explosive material instead of mining equipment. Peterson had converted his ship into a massive bomb and was planning to dock with the cruiser before detonating. Only Vexhai's caution had prevented the destruction of another major warship. This incident revealed a terrifying pattern in human behavior. They were not just willing to die fighting, they were actively seeking ways to maximize their deaths as weapons against the enemy. Every human ship became a potential bomb, and every surrender offer became a possible trap. The Confederation forces could no longer trust any communication from the planet. Surface Captain Lisa Rodriguez had become something of a legend among the Hmong. Remaining human forces after her successful ramming attack on the Eternal Glory. Other civilian ship captains began copying her tactics with devastating results. Transport Captain Danny Wells modified his passenger liner with improvised armor and weapons before crashing into a Confederation supply depot. The explosion destroyed enough ammunition and fuel to cripple 3 battle cruiser Senjura. Amy Foster took a different approach by using her technical knowledge to turn her cargo hauler into a guided missile. She removed all safety systems from the fusion drive and programmed the ship's computer to maintain course even after the crew compartment was destroyed. Her vessel struck a formation of 12 fighters, and the fusion explosion vaporized every ship in the squadron. What made these attacks so effective was not just the humans' willingness to die, but their technical creativity in maximizing destruction. Mining Captain Steve Adams had rigged his excavation charges to detonate in sequence, creating a focused explosion that could penetrate even dreadnought armor. Construction Supervisor Helen Garcia had modified her building materials into improvised weapons that could damage ships designed to withstand military-grade attacks. Psychological impact on Confederation forces was severe. Every approaching ship became a potential suicide attack. Every communication might be a trap. Every human face on a view screen might belong to someone planning to kill themselves to take enemy soldiers with them. The stress of constant vigilance began to break down military discipline and morale. Admiral Vortek tried to counter these tactics by destroying all approaching human vessels before they could get close enough to ram. But the humans adapted by using their ship's superior knowledge of local space conditions. Captain Rick Williams led a group of converted civilian vessels through an asteroid field that Confederation ships could not safely navigate. His improvised squadron emerged behind the main fleet and destroyed 2 cruisers before they could react. Humans also began using their damaged ships as weapons, even when they were no longer capable of flight. Dr. Patricia Moore had been trapped in a crippled medical transport when Confederation fighters attacked her convoy. Instead of surrendering, she programmed the ship's medical equipment to create chemical weapons from surgical supplies. When enemy boarding parties entered her ship, they were overcome by toxic gases that killed 12 soldiers and engineer. Bob Taylor took a similar approach when his construction ship lost power after being hit by plasma fire. He used the ship's industrial equipment to create improvised explosives and set them to detonate when enemy troops tried to salvage the vessel. The resulting explosion killed 37 Confederation soldiers and destroyed 2 boarding craft. These incidents taught the Confederation forces that no human ship could be considered safely neutralized until it was completely vaporized. Even heavily damaged vessels might contain deadly surprises prepared by crews who had nothing left to lose. The requirement to destroy every human ship completely began consuming massive amounts of ammunition and energy. The humans' most disturbing tactic was their use of apparent civilian vessels to deliver military strikes. A passenger transport commanded by Captain Jennifer Cole approached a Confederation medical ship while broadcasting distress signals. The transport appeared to be carrying wounded refugees who needed immediate medical attention. When the medical ship lowered its shields to begin rescue operations, Cole detonated charges that destroyed both vessels. This attack violated every known convention of warfare because it involved deliberate targeting of medical facilities. But the humans justified their actions by claiming the Confederation had started the war through unprovoked invasion. They argued that any enemy vessel in their space was a legitimate military target regardless of its stated purpose. Captain Maria Santos took command of a school transport that had been evacuating children from the combat zone. After delivering the children to safety, she loaded the ship with industrial chemicals and crashed it into a Confederation command vessel. The chemical fire that resulted killed over 400 enemy soldiers and disabled the ship's communication systems. The human tactics created an impossible situation for Confederation forces. They could not distinguish between genuine civilian vessels needing assistance and military attacks disguised as humanitarian situations. The safest policy was to destroy any approaching human ship, but this violated their own military codes regarding treatment of non-combatants. Admiral Vortak faced criticism from his own officers, who argued that fighting humans required abandoning civilized standards of warfare. Some commanders wanted to begin targeting civilian population centers to force surrender. Others suggested using chemical weapons to eliminate human resistance without risking more ships to suicide attacks, but the admiral had studied enough military history to understand that escalating violence against civilian populations often strengthened enemy resistance rather than weakening it. The humans were already fighting with desperate determination, and additional atrocities might only make them more creative in their revenge attacks. The breaking point came when the humans began coordinating their suicide attacks with precision. Timing. Captain Paul Garcia led a formation of 6 civilian ships in a complex attack pattern that overwhelmed the defensive systems of the remaining dreadnought. Each ship approached from a different angle, while the others provided covering fire and distraction. The attack succeeded in destroying the dreadnought, but the tactical coordination required suggested the humans had developed an effective command structure despite their apparent disorganization. They were learning from each engagement and developing new techniques for using inferior ships against superior enemies. Commander Zixthara paused in her testimony as the memories became too intense. She had witnessed the destruction of the most powerful warship in the Confederation fleet by a group of converted civilian vessels commanded by farmers and miners who had learned military tactics through desperate necessity. The analyst waited patiently for her to continue while processing the implications of what he had heard. The humans were not just primitive savages fighting with crude weapons. They were innovative warriors who could adapt their limited resources to achieve impossible victories through creative thinking and absolute determination. Zeke resumed her story by describing the final phase of the orbital battle when Admiral Vortok realized the remaining fleet could not achieve victory through conventional means. The humans had proven they could defeat superior technology through unconventional tactics and unlimited willingness to sacrifice their lives for strategic advantage. Commander Zixthara's voice grew hollow as she described the ground invasion that followed the orbital disaster. War analyst Kelenoth noticed her forearms trembling more violently as she prepared to relive the memories that still haunted her sleep. The remaining Confederation fleet had been forced to attempt a surface landing despite losing most of their ships to human suicide attacks. Admiral Vortek had convinced himself that ground combat would be different from the chaos of space battle. The surviving ships carried 40,000 elite soldiers with advanced plasma weapons and powered armor. The humans on the planet's surface were farmers and miners with basic chemical weapons and improvised defenses. Military doctrine suggested that superior training and equipment would overcome human desperation once the fighting moved to solid ground. Zixthara had commanded the 47th Shock Battalion, which consisted of 800 veteran soldiers who had conquered 12 worlds in previous campaigns. Her troops were equipped with energy shields and plasma rifles that could vaporize human soldiers instantly. Air-powered armor could deflect any projectile weapon humans possessed. Victory seemed certain despite the setbacks in orbit. The landing zones were carefully selected to avoid the heavily defended cities where human resistance would be strongest. Intelligence reports identified agricultural areas with minimal military presence where the invasion force could establish secure bases before advancing on population centers. The plan called for rapid deployment followed by systematic elimination of human defensive positions. But the humans had prepared for ground invasion as thoroughly as they had prepared for space combat. When the first Confederation dropships landed in what appeared to be empty farmland, they immediately came under attack from concealed positions throughout the area. The agricultural infrastructure had been converted into an integrated defensive network that could support sustained combat. Operation Sergeant Denny Brooks commanded a militia unit that had transformed grain storage silos into fortified bunkers with overlapping fields of fire. His farmers and agricultural workers had spent months preparing defensive positions while maintaining the appearance of normal farming activities. When Confederation forces landed, they found themselves surrounded by hidden strongpoints that appeared on no intelligence map. The human defensive strategy relied on intimate knowledge of local terrain, combined with creative use of civilian equipment. Irrigation tunnels became underground supply routes that allowed defenders to move between positions without exposure to enemy fire. Harvesting machinery was converted into mobile weapons platforms that could deliver devastating attacks before disappearing into the agricultural landscape. Private Maria Santos had become expert at using the vast cornfields as cover for sniper attacks against Confederation patrols. She would eliminate isolated soldiers and then vanish into the crops before reinforcements could locate her position. Her hunting rifle was primitive compared to plasma weapons, but it fired silently and could kill through gaps in powered armor. Psychological impact of fighting an invisible enemy began wearing down Confederation morale within hours of landing. Soldiers who had conquered worlds through superior firepower found themselves helpless against enemies they could not see or predict. Every field might contain snipers, and every farm building might be a weapons depot Corporal Steve Adams had rigged. Improvised explosive devices throughout the agricultural areas using fertilizer and fuel from farm equipment. His bombs were crude but effective against grouped infantry, and they could be detonated remotely from concealed positions. Confederation soldiers learned to fear every piece of farm machinery because it might explode when they approached. Humans refused to fight, according to conventional military doctrine, which made it impossible to predict or counter their tactics. Instead of defending fixed positions, they used mobile harassment to inflict constant casualties while avoiding decisive battles. Their strategy seemed designed to maximize psychological pressure rather than territorial control. Dr. Helen Garcia had studied captured Confederation soldiers to understand their biology and psychology. She discovered that certain sound frequencies and visual patterns could trigger panic responses in Krillian neurology. The humans began broadcasting these stimuli through hidden speakers to disrupt enemy operations and cause irrational behavior. Effectiveness of psychological warfare became apparent when entire Confederation squads began firing randomly at shadows and imaginary threats. Some soldiers refused to enter certain areas because the human broadcasts made them experience overwhelming fear. Others became so paranoid they attacked their own comrades during night operations. Captain Jeff Miller organized civilian volunteers into hunter-killer teams that specialized in tracking and eliminating Confederation patrols. His people used their knowledge of local wildlife and weather patterns to set ambush that were impossible to detect with military sensors. They could appear from anywhere at any time to strike isolated enemy units. The humans also demonstrated remarkable adaptability in learning to use captured Confederation equipment. Engineer Tom Wilson had figured out how to modify plasma rifles to overload their power cells and create improvised grenades. Within days of the first landing, human fighters were using enemy weapons more creatively than their original designers had intended. Zishira's battalion began suffering steady casualties from an enemy they could rarely see and never seem to defeat. Every patrol lost soldiers to sniper fire or hidden explosives. Every advance was slowed by obstacles that appeared overnight. Every victory was temporary because the humans would simply fade away and reappear somewhere else. The breaking point came when the humans began targeting Confederation command personnel specifically. Sniper Lisa Thompson had identified officers through their behavior and equipment, then eliminated them with precise long-range shots. Losing experienced leaders to an enemy armed with primitive weapons was devastating to unit morale and effectiveness communication. Specialist Karen Davis had learned to intercept and decode Confederation radio transmissions using salvaged equipment. She provided targeting information to human fighters while broadcasting false orders to enemy units. Her psychological operations created confusion and mistrust within Confederation ranks. The humans' most terrifying characteristic was their refusal to accept defeat even when surrounded and outnumbered. Corporal Steve Adams chose to detonate his position rather than surrender when his bunker was overrun by Confederation forces. His final explosive attack killed 37 enemy soldiers and destroyed 2 armored vehicles. This pattern repeated throughout the ground campaign as human defenders consistently chose death over capture. They seemed to view survival as less important than inflicting maximum casualties on the invading force. Their willingness to die fighting made every engagement extremely costly for Confederation units. Private Maria Santos continued her sniper attacks even after being wounded by plasma fire. She crawled through irrigation ditches while bleeding heavily to reach positions where she could eliminate more enemy soldiers. Her final confirmed kill was a Confederation colonel who had been coordinating artillery strikes against human positions. Psychological pressure of fighting an enemy that refused to value their own lives began breaking down Confederation military discipline. Soldiers who had been trained to accept reasonable casualties found themselves facing opponents who would gladly trade their lives for single enemy deaths. The mathematics of attrition warfare favored the humans despite their technological disadvantage. Engineer Amy Foster had converted agricultural processing equipment into weapons manufacturing facilities It could produce improvised explosives and ammunition from farm supplies. Her hidden factories supplied human fighters throughout the region while remaining invisible to Confederation aerial reconnaissance. The humans' ability to maintain organized resistance despite heavy casualties suggested they possessed command and communication systems that Confederation intelligence had failed to identify. Orders and supplies continued reaching isolated defenders, even when their positions appeared completely cut off from outside support. Captain Ben Thompson organized raids against Confederation supply depots using converted farm vehicles that could approach enemy positions without triggering military sensors. His attacks disrupted logistics operations and forced the invaders to dedicate increasing numbers of soldiers to rear area security rather than front line combat. The ground campaign that was supposed to last days stretched into weeks as human resistance proved impossible to eliminate through conventional tactics. Every farm became a potential fortress, and every civilian became a potential combatant. The Confederation forces found themselves fighting an entire population rather than a military organization's itch. Testimony revealed the full horror of fighting an enemy that had transformed their civilian infrastructure into military assets while maintaining the appearance of harmless agricultural workers. The humans had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength by making it impossible to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. Analyst Kellenoth struggled to process the implications of what he was hearing. War Analyst Kellenoth watched Commander Zixthara gather her strength before continuing with the most disturbing part of her testimony. 3 weeks had passed since the initial invasion, and what should have been a simple 2-day operation had become a nightmare that consumed both sides. The Confederation forces were exhausted and demoralized, while the humans seemed to grow more determined. With each passing day, Admiral Vortek had finally accepted that conventional military tactics would not work against the human defenders. His remaining forces were trapped in a grinding war of attrition that favored the enemy despite their technological advantages. Every day brought more casualties and no measurable progress toward victory. The Admiral faced the unprecedented decision of whether to escalate to total warfare or acknowledge defeat. The turning point came when Captain Rick Williams made contact with Confederation Command through captured communication equipment. Williams had emerged as the leader of human resistance operations, and his message was not what anyone expected. Instead of offering surrender, he wanted to negotiate for the return of captured Confederation prisoners in exchange for safe passage off the planet Zixthara. Remembered the shock that ran through the command structure when Williams' transmission reached the flagship. No one had expected the humans to take prisoners during such desperate fighting. Military doctrine assumed that primitive species would either kill captured enemies immediately or torture them for information. The idea that farmers and miners were following rules of warfare was almost impossible to accept. The humans had captured nearly 300 Confederation soldiers during the ground campaign. These prisoners had been treated according to something called Geneva Conventions, which were human rules for the conduct of warfare. Wounded enemy soldiers received medical care before human casualties. Prisoners were fed the same rations as human fighters even when supplies were critically short. Captain Williams explained that human society had developed these rules through centuries of warfare among their own species. They believed that treating prisoners humanely was a sign of civilization rather than weakness. Even in desperate combat against alien invaders, the humans maintained their ethical standards. Regarding captured enemies, this revelation disturbed Confederation officers more than the suicide attacks or psychological warfare. An enemy they could show mercy while fighting with absolute determination was something outside their understanding of military behavior. The humans were simultaneously the most ruthless and most civilized opponents they had ever encountered. Patricia Moore had organized the medical treatment of Confederation prisoners using supplies that were desperately needed for human casualties. She explained to captured soldiers that healing wounded enemies was required by human military law, even during invasion situations. Her actions had saved the lives of dozens of Confederation troops who would have died from their injuries. The human treatment of prisoners created a psychological conflict within Confederation ranks. Soldiers who had been taught to fear capture more than death discovered that human enemies would risk their own resources to preserve enemy lives. This contradiction between human mercy and human ferocity was impossible to reconcile with military. Training engineer Bob Taylor had constructed proper shelter and sanitation facilities for Confederation prisoners, while his own people lived in underground bunkers. He insisted that enemies deserved basic dignity, even during wartime. His work had prevented disease outbreaks that could have killed hundreds if captured. Soldiers Captain Williams' negotiation offer included detailed records of prisoner treatment and medical care. He provided the names and conditions of every captured soldier along with documentation proving they had been treated according to human standards. The evidence showed that Confederation prisoners were healthier than many human fighters. Williams also delivered an ultimatum that haunts Zixthara to this day. He warned that human patience was running out, and that continued fighting would force them to abandon defensive tactics. He said the humans had been holding back their most destructive capabilities, while hoping the invaders would see reason and withdraw voluntarily. The threat was not empty boasting. Intelligence reports had begun reaching Admiral Vortek about human activities on other worlds. New Texas was mobilizing its entire population for war. New Australia was converting its mining fleet into weapons platforms. New California was organizing volunteer expeditions to assist New Dakota. The entire human species was preparing for coordinated warfare. Captain Williams explained that humans had a concept called total war, which meant using every resource and every person in society for military purposes. The fighting on New Dakota had been limited warfare by human standards because they were only using local defenders and improvised weapons. True human military capability involved entire populations working together with industrial resources dedicated to weapons production. The prospect of fighting multiple human worlds simultaneously was terrifying enough, but Williams revealed something worse. The humans were fascinated by Confederation technology and had been studying captured equipment to understand its principles. Human engineers were already developing improved versions of alien weapons using their own manufacturing techniques. Engineer Karen Davis had reverse-engineered plasma rifle power cells and figured out how to produce them using human industrial equipment. Her work meant that human fighters could maintain captured weapons indefinitely without depending on enemy supplies. She had also discovered ways to increase the power output beyond original specifications. The humans' rapid technological adaptation demonstrated learning abilities that exceeded Confederation estimates. They could analyze alien technology and improve upon it within weeks of first contact. This suggested that given time, they could develop weapons and defenses superior to anything new. Confederation-possessed Captain Williams provided examples of human technological creativity that had emerged during the fighting. Farmer Jim Peterson had developed armor-piercing ammunition using agricultural chemicals and metal salvage. His improvised rounds could penetrate Confederation body armor more effectively than standard military projectiles. Constructor Helen Garcia had modified human industrial equipment to manufacture energy weapons comparable to Confederation plasma rifles. Her workshop was producing weapons that could arm thousands of additional fighters. The humans were transforming their civilian technology into military applications faster than anyone thought possible. Most disturbing revelation was that human resistance was becoming more organized and effective as the fighting continued. What had started as desperate improvisation was evolving into systematic military doctrine. The humans were learning from every engagement and developing new tactics. Specifically designed to counter Confederation advantages, Admiral Vortak faced a strategic nightmare. The longer the fighting continued, the stronger human resistance became. They were gaining experience with alien technology while developing new weapons and tactics. Other human worlds were mobilizing to support New Dakota. The invasion that should have ended quickly was creating a larger conflict that could threaten. Confederation Security Captain Williams offered one final chance for peaceful resolution. The Confederation could withdraw immediately with their surviving personnel and captured soldiers. In exchange, the humans would consider the invasion a misunderstanding rather than an act of war. They would not pursue revenge against Confederation, territory, or launch counterattacks against alien worlds. But Williams also made clear what would happen if fighting continued. The humans would abandon their defensive strategy and begin offensive operations against Confederation positions. They would stop taking prisoners and start targeting command structures directly. Most importantly, they would begin treating the conflict as a species survival situation rather than a local territorial dispute. The implications were clear to anyone who understood human psychology. The species that had survived by refusing to accept defeat would not stop fighting until they achieved complete victory or complete extinction. There would be no negotiated settlement and no partial outcomes. The Confederation would either withdraw immediately or face total war against an enemy that grew stronger with every battle. Zixthara described the desperate conference between Admiral Vortak and his surviving officers as they tried to process Williams' ultimatum. The Admiral had three choices. He could escalate to weapons of mass destruction, an attempt to eliminate all human resistance through planetary bombardment. He could continue the ground campaign and hope to achieve victory before other human worlds could intervene. Or he could accept defeat and withdraw from New Dakota with whatever forces remained. Decision to retreat was unprecedented in Confederation military history. No previous campaign had ended in withdrawal from a technologically inferior enemy. But the alternative was risking a wider war against opponents who had proven they could adapt and innovate faster than conventional military planning. Could Counter-Admiral Vortak's final transmission to Confederation Command attempted to explain why retreat was the only rational choice. The humans were not just another primitive species that could be conquered through superior technology. Commander Zixthara sat in silence for several minutes before beginning the final part of her testimony. War analyst Kellenoth waited patiently as she gathered the strength to describe the aftermath of the New Dakota disaster and the intelligence reports that had arrived in the months since the retreat. What she had learned about human nature during the fighting was disturbing enough, but the deeper research into human history revealed something far more terrifying: the evacuation from New Dakota had proceeded exactly as Captain Rick Williams had promised. Human forces maintained their positions, but did not interfere with Confederation withdrawal operations. They provided medical assistance for wounded soldiers and even shared supplies when Confederation ships ran short of food and water during the retreat. The humans honored their agreement completely while studying every detail of alien technology and tactics. But the most unsettling aspect of the withdrawal was how the humans treated it as a learning experience rather than a victory celebration. They documented every weapon system and recorded conversations with Confederation personnel. Engineer Corinne Davis had interviewed captured soldiers about their training and equipment while providing medical care. The humans were gathering intelligence for future conflicts while maintaining perfect diplomatic courtesy during the months following the retreat. Zixthara had been assigned to intelligence analysis of human capabilities and intentions. Her first-hand combat experience made her valuable for interpreting reports from Confederation agents who were monitoring human activities across their scattered colonies. What she discovered challenged every assumption about the species and their Potential threat level. The humans had not simply defeated one invasion through desperate improvisation. Their entire evolutionary development had been shaped by constant warfare against environmental challenges and competing human groups. Their planet Earth had experienced repeated ice ages, volcanic disasters, and climate changes that would have destroyed most species. The humans had survived by developing an ability to adapt rapidly to changing conditions. Human history revealed a pattern of technological advancement, driven by military necessity. They had developed metallurgy to make better weapons. They had invented chemistry to create explosives. They had mastered physics to build more effective killing devices. Every major human scientific breakthrough had military applications that appeared within years of discovery. Most disturbing discovery was that humans had been fighting wars among themselves for thousands of years before achieving space travel. Their species had developed sophisticated military doctrine through constant practice against opponents who understood their capabilities and limitations. The Confederation had faced enemies who had been preparing for warfare since before they left their rough home planet. Intelligence reports showed that human colonies were not the scattered agricultural settlements they appeared to be. Each world was connected through communication networks that allowed rapid coordination of resources and personnel. When New Dakota was attacked, the entire human species had begun mobilizing for larger conflicts within hours of receiving the distress signal. Captain Williams had been truthful about human technological adaptation capabilities. Engineer Bob Taylor had already produced improved versions of Confederation plasma weapons using human manufacturing techniques. His designs were more efficient and reliable than the original alien technology. Given time, the humans could develop weapons that exceeded Confederation capabilities. The speed of human learning was beyond anything in Confederation experience. Dr. Patricia Moore had mastered alien medical technology in weeks and was already training other humans in its use. Her students were developing new techniques that combined human and alien knowledge to create superior treatment methods. But the most frightening intelligence concerned human population and industrial capacity. The agricultural worlds that seemed so primitive were actually supporting populations larger than most Confederation colonies. New Dakota alone had 800,000 residents with industrial facilities capable of supporting millions more. New Texas had over 2 million humans with mining and manufacturing operations that could be converted to weapons production. The humans were not a scattered collection of primitive farmers. They were an expanding technological civilization that had chosen to present a peaceful appearance while maintaining the capability for total warfare. Their colonies looked harmless because they had deliberately designed them to avoid attracting attention from potentially hostile alien species. Captain Rick Williams had become something of a legend among human colonies after the New Dakota victory. Intelligence reports showed him traveling between worlds to share tactical knowledge and coordinate defensive preparations. As humans were treating the Confederation invasion as a warning that required species-wide response rather than a local. Incident Engineer Amy Foster had established training programs that taught human civilians how to convert industrial equipment into military applications. Her courses were spreading to every human world, along with detailed information about Confederation technology and tactics. The humans were preparing their entire population for the possibility of larger conflicts. The most disturbing development was human interest in Confederation politics and military doctrine. They had begun studying alien species and their relationships within the Galactic Confederation. Human agents were gathering intelligence about potential allies and enemies throughout the galaxy. They were preparing for diplomatic and military operations on an interstellar scale. Dr. Helen Garcia had developed psychological profiles of different alien species based on her studies of captured Confederation soldiers. Her work included specific recommendations for psychological warfare techniques that would be effective against each species. The humans were systematically analyzing the weaknesses of potential enemy Sixthara, explained to the analyst that human strategic thinking operated on timescales that exceeded normal military planning. They were not just preparing for immediate conflicts, but were developing capabilities for wars that might not occur for decades. Their long-term perspective made them extremely dangerous opponents because they could wait for optimal conditions. Before taking action, the humans had also demonstrated an ability to learn from defeat that was unprecedented in Confederation experience. Species that lost initial conflicts usually became demoralized and accepted subordinate status. The humans had used their defeat in space combat to develop new tactics that turned their weaknesses into advantages. They learned faster from failure than most species learned from success. Intelligence reports indicated that human colonies were sharing technology and resources at an accelerating rate. New California had developed improved armor designs based on analysis of Confederation equipment. New Australia had created mining techniques that could be used for military construction projects. Each world was contributing specialized knowledge to collective human capabilities. Most chilling discovery was that humans had concepts of warfare that the Confederation had never encountered. They had developed strategies for conflicts lasting decades or centuries. They understood economic warfare, industrial mobilization, and population organization for sustained military operations. Their approach to conflict was comprehensive in ways that alien military doctrine could not address. Captain Williams had published writings about the new Dakota campaign that were being studied throughout human space. His analysis included detailed critiques of Confederation tactics and suggestions for countering similar invasions. The humans were treating their first contact with alien military forces as educational material for future conflicts. Ixachur concluded her testimony with a warning that the War Council had refused to accept. The humans were not just another primitive species that could be conquered through superior technology. They were evolutionary survivors who had developed the ability to turn any challenge into an opportunity for growth and adaptation. The Confederation had made a critical error by attacking New Dakota before understanding human capabilities and intentions. The invasion had revealed alien technology and tactics to opponents who could analyze and improve upon anything they encountered. The humans now knew that hostile aliens existed, and they were preparing for larger conflicts. Her final recommendation was that the Galactic Confederation should immediately classify humanity as Category 1 extinction-level threat and establish diplomatic relations before the humans decided that preemptive warfare was necessary for species survival. The alternative was facing an enemy that grew stronger with every encounter and never accepted defeat as permanent. War analyst Kelenoff struggled to process the implications of Sixthara's complete testimony. The humans had not only defeated a Confederation invasion, but had used the experience to prepare for interstellar warfare on a scale that threatened the stability of the entire galaxy. They possessed technological adaptability, psychological resilience, and strategic thinking that exceeded anything in alien experience. The final entry in Sixthara's report contained her most disturbing observation. The humans had not celebrated their victory